7-year-old girl leaned in and whispered, "Don't drink that yet," to the Mafia boss during dinner. Inside, the grand dining hall smelled of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the faint smoke of burning candles. The windows, tall and arched, reflected the moonlight in a way that made the shadows move like living things. Tonight, the hall was alive with whispers and quiet steps. Nobles masked in etiquette dined with a man whose name alone could silence a room, Lucian Daubry. Lucian sat at the head of the table. His black hair was slicked back, his dark eyes sharp and unreadable, scanning every corner of the hall. He had the presence of someone who did not need to raise a hand to command attention. Even the most confident guests found themselves glancing away, as if a shadow had passed over their courage. On the table before him were foods of every kind: roasted pheasant, fruits glazed in sugar, fine bread, and goblets filled with the richest wine. Everything in this room was meant to impress, yet even the finest delicacies could not mask the undercurrent of tension. Lucian lifted his goblet, examining the deep red liquid inside. He had tasted many wines in his life, yet tonight something in his mind felt off. The subtle shimmer of the liquid caught the candlelight, reflecting like a warning. He paused. The guests watched in silence. A single wrong sip could mean ruin. For Lucian, such dangers were not uncommon, but tonight felt different. It was then that she appeared. No one noticed her arrival at first. A small, quiet figure slipped through the shadows, moving with the confidence of someone far older than her age. Her hair was a dark wave, falling to her shoulders, and her eyes seemed to see everything. The secrets behind masks, the weight of every glance, and the hidden threads of fate itself. She stopped at Lucian's side, and for the first time that evening a sound escaped him, a small, surprised exhale. "Don't drink that yet," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost a secret shared only between them, but it carried a strange authority. The room froze. Nobles' forks hovered midair, servants stopped mid-step, and even the fire seemed to pause, its flickering shadows stilling. Everyone turned to look, but only Lucian and the girl felt the strange weight of the moment. Lucian leaned back, his brow furrowed. "Who?" he started, but she held up a small, delicate hand. "Don't. Not yet," she said again, her small voice trembling only slightly, but it rang with certainty. Lucian stared at her, confused, wary, and intrigued all at once. How could a child know? And yet there was something in her presence, a strange pull like a current running under the surface that made him listen. He set his goblet down carefully. "Very well," he said, his voice calm, though his mind raced. "And who are you?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide, unafraid, almost piercing in their honesty. "Elara," she said simply, "you should wait. There's something in the wine, something that isn't meant for you yet." The nobles murmured, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. Lucian's personal guard, tall men trained to sense threats from a mile away, tensed instinctively. But Lucian only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that could both invite and warn at once. "You are bold," he said. "Why warn me?" Elara's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "Because someone wants you to fall," she whispered, "and you cannot see it." Lucian studied her. She was only a child, yet her words carried weight, as if the world itself leaned on her tiny shoulders. There was no fear in her eyes, only certainty. And that certainty, for reasons he could not name, made his chest tighten. He set his hand on the table near hers, though not touching. "A warning from a child or from fate?" he asked softly, his tone curious rather than mocking. Elara's eyes flickered with something older than her years. "Perhaps both," she said. The guests tried to recover their composure, but the tension lingered. Lucian's eyes returned to the wine. The red shimmered under the candlelight as if it were alive. For a long moment he considered defying her warning, testing the limits of chance and power. But something in the air, the faint smell of smoke, the chill that had suddenly crept into the room, told him that her words were not mere superstition. He lowered his gaze to her. "Tell me, how do you know?" Alara's hand brushed lightly over a small pendant at her neck. "I see things," she said softly. "I see what is hidden, what will happen, and tonight it could be very bad." Lucian's lips pressed together, a rare feeling stirring in him, an unfamiliar mix of fascination and unease. He had faced many dangers, crossed countless enemies, and yet the certainty in this girl's gaze made him pause. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that not all power could be measured by fear or wealth. Some power was quiet, invisible, a force of its own. The candles flickered suddenly, as if agreeing with her warning. A chill passed through the hall, and a distant echo of laughter, soft, faint, almost like a memory, ran through the shadows. Lucian's instincts, honed over years of careful calculation, urged him to trust the child. And in that moment he did. The girl straightened slightly, her small shoulders firm with the weight of her responsibility. "You have time," she said, "but not much. Listen carefully." Lucian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Then speak," he said. Alara's voice dropped to a whisper, though every word seemed to expand and fill the space around them. She spoke of hidden dangers, of forces in the city that moved like shadows, and of a curse that could bind a man to darkness if he was careless. Every word painted a picture of a world beyond the ordinary, a world of magic, fate, and unseen eyes watching every move. By the time she finished, Lucian's mind raced. The dinner, the guests, the wine, all of it suddenly seemed like pieces of a puzzle far larger than any of them realized. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment the fearsome mask he always wore fell away. All that remained was a man, startled and moved by a child who could see the truth hidden from the eyes of kings and nobles alike. "Why help me?" he asked again, quietly. Alara tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Because someone must," she said simply. "And because, if I do not, you will not survive the night. Not as yourself, anyway." A strange silence followed. The sounds of the hall, the clinking of silver, the soft murmurs, seemed distant now. Lucian felt something shift inside him, an awareness that this small child had changed the course of his evening, perhaps even his fate. Finally, he nodded slowly, almost reverently. "I will heed your warning." Alara's lips curved into a small smile. "Good. But remember, this is only the beginning." She stepped back into the shadows, and the moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. The guests, still unsure what had happened, returned to their meals, though a quiet unease lingered. Lucian lifted his goblet again, this time to drink, but paused once more, thinking of her words, and then set it down. That night, alone in his chamber, Lucian found himself staring at the empty space where she had stood. The image of her small, solemn face remained burned into his mind. He could not understand why, but he felt as if a thread had been tied between them, a delicate, invisible bond that promised both danger and revelation. Sleep came fitfully, and when it did, Lucian dreamt of her once more. Only in the dream she was older, her eyes bright with knowledge far beyond her years. She stood on a cliff above a storm-tossed sea, her hair whipping in the wind. "You owe me," she said, her voice carrying across the waves, "and the debt will follow you always." Lucian awoke with a start, the echo of her words still ringing in his ears. The night was quiet again, but he knew it would not remain so. Somewhere in the shadows of the manor, in the city, or perhaps in the very threads of fate itself, something had begun, a movement that could not be stopped. And it all began with a whisper from a child. The morning came slowly to the city, draping the streets in gray mist. The manor on the hill, which had seemed quiet the night before, now looked heavier, as if it carried the weight of secrets that could crush the strongest men. Lucian Daubry walked through the halls in silence. His mind was a storm, replaying the whispered warning of the child, Alara, and the dream that had followed it. He had spent his life commanding respect, bending fear into power, and keeping enemies at bay with a single glance. Yet for the first time he felt a hesitation he could not name. The wine, the warning, the girl's eyes, They all lingered in his mind like shadows that refused to disperse. He knew he needed to understand who she was and why she had approached him. Lucian found himself in the library, a room so vast that the walls seemed to reach the sky, lined with books and scrolls that held the knowledge of generations. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air. Here he was most at ease, among truths that could be studied and measured. Yet the truth about Alara was different. It was something that could not be contained in books, something alive and shifting. He searched for hours, reading records of strange happenings in the city, accounts of curses, visions, and unusual children. Each story seemed disconnected, but when he placed them together, a pattern began to emerge. There were whispers of a bloodline gifted, or cursed, with the ability to see the threads of fate, to warn, to guide, and sometimes to punish. Lucian's mind raced as he realized that Alara fit every detail. It was late afternoon when a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He looked up expecting a servant, but the figure in the doorway was small, familiar, and certain. "Alara, why are you here again?" Lucian asked, a faint smile on his lips. His voice carried curiosity instead of reprimand, though it was clear he could command her to leave. "I came to make sure you are safe," she said simply, stepping into the room. Her gaze scanned the towering shelves as if searching for something invisible. "You must listen, or something will take you that you cannot fight." Lucian leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You speak in riddles, but I am listening. Tell me more." Alara crossed the room and sat on the edge of a low table. Her small feet did not touch the floor. "The wine was a warning," she began, "but the danger is greater than that. There are forces in the city that move like shadows. They want more than your life. They want your soul." Lucian's hand tightened on the armrest. He had faced threats before, yet her words struck a chord of unease. There was something in her certainty, a sharpness beyond her years, that suggested she knew more than any ordinary child could. "You speak as if you have walked through all of this yourself," he said quietly. "But you are only 7. "I am 7, she said, her tone calm, "but I see what others cannot. I see threads, and tonight, one of those threads could tie you to a darkness you cannot escape." Lucian studied her closely. He had learned to read people, to predict movements and intentions, but she was different. There was a wisdom in her eyes that no one could teach. He felt a strange pull toward her, a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. "Show me," he said finally, his voice low. "Show me what you see." Alara reached into her small satchel and pulled out a smooth, dark crystal. It was cold to the touch, and when Lucian held it, he felt a faint vibration like a heartbeat. "This is tied to the curse," she explained. "It is not dangerous by itself, but it will show you what could happen if you ignore the warning. Watch carefully." Lucian placed the crystal on the table. The surface shimmered, and the room darkened slightly as images began to appear. He saw shadows moving through the streets, eyes glowing in the darkness, and figures cloaked in smoke that slithered like serpents. He saw his own face twisted in despair, trapped in a web of consequences he could not untangle. He looked up at Alara. "And you can see all of this," she nodded. "Not everything, but enough, and enough to save you if you listen." Lucian's chest tightened. For years he had believed that power meant control, yet here was a child, small and delicate, who held knowledge he could not command. He realized that some power was not in force or fear. It was in foresight, in wisdom, and in trust. The room fell silent, the weight of the vision pressing down on them both. Lucian's mind raced with possibilities. He could ignore it, dismiss it, and continue life as before, but the image of failure, of despair, burned in his mind. He could not forget it. "Where did this curse come from?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm in his mind. Alara's eyes darkened, and she drew a slow breath. "Long ago," she began, "there was a city much like this one, ruled by kings and queens who sought power above all else. They made a pact with a spirit of shadow, and in doing so, they tied the fate of their descendants to a chain of warnings and debts. Some were cursed to see the threads of fate, others to guard them, and some to suffer if the chain is broken. You are part of that story, Lucian. Lucian's hand brushed against the crystal. The images shimmered again, showing not only the shadows outside the city but the potential for light. There was a way to break the chain, to protect himself and others, but it required choices that went against every instinct he had learned to rely on. Trust, restraint, and wisdom would be needed instead of strength and fear. You are saying, Lucian began, that I cannot control everything, that I cannot fight this with power. Alara nodded solemnly. No, not with power alone. You must listen and you must learn. The city has always been balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move and everything falls. Lucian leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb the weight of her words. All his life he had believed that fear could protect, that respect could command, and that strength could prevent any danger. Yet here in this quiet room with a child who saw more than he did, he understood something new. Some dangers required patience, observation, and understanding, a different kind of strength. I do not know if I am ready, he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. But I will try, I must. Alara smiled faintly, the ghost of relief crossing her small features. That is all I ask, she said. But remember, time is shorter than it seems. The shadows do not wait. As the day passed, Lucian could not shake the feeling of eyes watching him. Not just the city's usual spies and informants, but something older, quieter, and more dangerous. He walked the halls of the manor, checking doors and windows, yet the sense of being observed never left. And all the while he thought of Alara, the small girl who had spoken truth in a world of lies. That evening he returned to the dining hall. The candles flickered, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than before. He placed the crystal on the table and watched as it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He thought of the visions he had seen, of the threads of fate, and of the delicate balance that must be maintained. Will she come again? He wondered aloud, knowing the answer was uncertain. As if in answer, the shadows shifted, and Alara appeared once more. She stepped from the darkness with a grace that made her seem almost unreal. The crystal in her hand glowed faintly, reflecting the candlelight. Lucian, she said softly, the time has come to take the next step. You must see beyond this house, beyond the city, and understand the forces at work. The threads of fate are moving faster now. One wrong choice and— She stopped, her eyes locking on his. And the darkness will not wait. Lucian studied her. He wanted to ask questions, to demand details, but something in her gaze silenced him. She was not a child in the ordinary sense. She carried the weight of a destiny that even he, for all his power, could not ignore. Show me, he said finally. Take me to what I must see. Alara nodded, her small hand brushing against his as she stepped closer. The crystal pulsed brighter, illuminating the hall in a soft red glow. Lucian felt a strange pull in his chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation, and realized that whatever lay ahead could not be fought with strength or strategy alone. It was a journey into the unknown, guided by a child who held the wisdom of the ages. And as the manor's doors closed behind them, the night outside seemed darker, heavier, and filled with possibilities that could shape not only their fates but the future of the city itself. The shadows of the cursed heart had begun to move, and Lucian knew, with a deep certainty, that the thread connecting him to Alara would pull him into a destiny he could neither resist nor fully understand. The city had changed since the night of the whispered warning. Shadows stretched longer along the cobblestone streets, and the fog seemed thicker, curling around the towers and alleys like living smoke. Lucian walked beside Alara, his mind still reeling from the visions the crystal had shown him. He had faced enemies, betrayals, and threats, yet nothing had unsettled him like the knowledge that the threads of fate themselves were moving, and that a child, or something far older than a child, held the key to understanding them. Alara walked beside him, her small hand occasionally brushing his sleeve. She had grown, though subtly, almost imperceptibly. Her presence now seemed more commanding. Her eyes glimmered with wisdom, tempered by sorrow and responsibility. The child who had once whispered warnings now led him through the misted streets with a certainty that left Lucian both unsettled and captivated. "The shadows are restless tonight," she said softly, her voice carrying over the fog. "The curse grows stronger. You must be ready, Lucian. You cannot rely on what you know from before." Lucian studied her. He had learned patience over the years, but the sight of her, small, yet with a weight beyond her years, stirred something in him. "And what must I do?" he asked quietly. "How do I face what I cannot see or touch?" Alara stopped and looked up at him. "You must trust, not in power, not in fear, but in understanding. That is the only way. The city watches, the threads move, and if you step wrong, you will fall." Lucian felt the pull of her words deep in his chest. For years, he had relied on control, planning, and instinct. Now, he realized that some battles required a different kind of strength, restraint, patience, and wisdom. He had to step into a world where the rules were unseen and the danger invisible. They turned into a narrow alley that led to a hidden courtyard, forgotten by most, though it carried a strange energy. The cobblestones were uneven, and the walls bore faded carvings that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. At the center, a pool of water reflected the moonlight, shimmering like liquid silver. Alara stopped at the edge, holding the crystal in her small hand. "This is where it begins," she said. "Here you will see the threads more clearly, but remember you cannot interfere with everything you see. Some threads are meant to be watched, not touched." Lucian knelt beside her, the chill of the night seeping into his bones. "And if I fail?" he asked, his voice low. She met his gaze without fear. "Then the curse claims more than just you. It spreads." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The crystal pulsed in her hand, sending faint waves of light across the water. Lucian felt a strange energy, like the heartbeat of the city itself, and in that moment he understood the depth of what Alara had been trying to teach him. "Show me," he said finally, his voice firm. "I am ready." Alara placed the crystal gently on the water's surface. The liquid rippled, glowing, and then images began to rise like mist from the pool. Lucian saw the streets of the city, the shadowed figures that moved unseen, and visions of himself in countless outcomes, some victorious, others broken, some cruel and some surprisingly gentle. Each possibility shimmered and shifted, as though the city itself were testing him. "You see," Alara said, her voice almost a whisper, "each choice you make spins a thread. Every step, every word, every decision, it matters." Lucian nodded, absorbing the images, feeling their weight in his chest. For the first time, he realized that power was not in fear or control alone. It was in understanding the consequences of every action, in predicting the movements of forces beyond sight. And now he had to act with care, guided by Alara, whose presence was both a beacon and a reminder of the stakes. Hours passed as they watched the pool, the crystal showing more threads, more possibilities, more dangers. Lucian's mind ached with the knowledge of what could happen, and yet he could not turn away. Every glimpse into the future brought him closer to understanding, and closer to Alara. He felt a connection to her that went beyond words, a silent understanding born from shared responsibility and mutual respect. "Alara," he said finally, his voice low, "how do you bear it, to see all of this and carry so much on your shoulders?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment she looked almost younger, almost like a child again. "I do not bear it alone," she said. "The threads choose me and I must follow, but it is heavy. Sometimes I wish I could step away, but I cannot. Not when lives, not just yours, depend on me." Lucian felt a lump in his throat. He had faced many burdens, but none had weighed like this. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the responsibilities and dangers that seemed far too great for someone so small. Yet he knew he could not. She was stronger than she appeared, and he had to trust her wisdom. Suddenly, The pool shimmered more brightly, and a new image appeared, one that made Lucian's heart tighten. A cloaked figure moved through the city, its eyes glowing faintly, watching, waiting. The figure's presence radiated a strange energy, one that seemed to pull at the threads of fate themselves. "Ilara," Lucian said, voice tight with concern, "who is that?" Her face darkened. "A warlock," she said quietly, "one who has learned to feed from the curse. He watches those who are connected to it, seeking to twist fate for his own gain. You must be careful. His power is subtle but dangerous." Lucian clenched his fists. He had faced many enemies before, but the idea of a force that could manipulate fate itself unsettled him in a way no mortal danger ever had. "And he is aware of me because of you," Ilara nodded. "Yes, the moment I warned you, he knew. He will try to use the threads to his advantage, but there is a way to stop him, a choice you must make, and it is not easy." Lucian felt a chill. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than any enemy he had ever faced. But as he looked at her, he felt a strange surge of determination. He would not falter. He would protect the city, and he would protect her. "Tell me what to do," he said. Ilara held his gaze, her eyes reflecting both wisdom and the sorrow of knowing too much. "We must find the heart of the curse," she said. "It is the source of the threads and the power the warlock seeks. Once we find it, we can confront him, but it is hidden in a place where shadows and time twist. Many who enter do not return unchanged." Lucian swallowed, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "Then we go together," she nodded, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "Together," she agreed. They left the courtyard and entered the city's winding streets. The fog grew thicker, curling around their legs and arms, as if the city itself were testing their resolve. Shadows moved at the edges of vision, figures that seemed to vanish when looked at directly. The air was heavy with magic and mystery, a world that existed just beneath the ordinary, waiting for those who could see it. As they walked, Ilara guided him with precision, avoiding traps, hidden currents of power, and the eyes of watchers. Each step brought them closer to the source of the curse, but also deeper into danger. Lucian marveled at her skill, her confidence, and the quiet authority that seemed to radiate from her, even now. Finally, they reached a hidden archway at the edge of the city. The stone was black and worn, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Ilara placed the crystal against the arch, and it glowed, revealing a hidden path. "This is it," she said softly. "Beyond this arch lies the heart of the curse. Once we enter, there is no turning back. We must be careful, Lucian. The warlock will be aware, and he will not wait for us to prepare." Lucian nodded, feeling the weight of the choice before him. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. Here, strategy and strength were not enough. They needed trust, understanding, and courage. He reached out his hand. "Then let us go." Ilara placed her small hand in his, and together they stepped through the archway. The world shifted. The air grew thick and cold, the fog turning into a swirling mist of shadows and light. Shapes moved at the edge of vision, whispers filled the air, and time seemed to bend around them. Lucian felt a strange pull, as though unseen forces were tugging at his thoughts and his heart. Yet with Ilara beside him, guiding him, he felt a determination he had never known. They were not alone, and together they could face whatever lay ahead. As they moved deeper, a shadow detached itself from the swirling mist. The warlock, cloaked in darkness, stepped onto the path before them. His eyes glimmered like coals, and a faint smile curved his lips. "Ah," the warlock said, his voice smooth and chilling, "so this is the one the child has chosen. And you, Lucian Daubry, the threads brought you here willingly." Lucian tightened his grip on the crystal. He felt the pull of fate, strong and dangerous, and he realized that the true test was about to begin, not of strength, but of heart, trust, and wisdom. Ilara whispered in his ear, "Remember, Lucian, the threads can be seen but not controlled. You must choose wisely." The warlock stepped closer, shadows swirling around him like a living cloak. One wrong move and everything you value will fall. Are you ready? Lucian met the warlock's gaze, and for the first time he felt a fear that was not of the body but of the soul. Yet alongside it was a strange certainty. He would not falter. He would face the curse, the warlock, and the threads of fate itself. And in that moment the path ahead seemed both impossible and inevitable. The air inside the hidden path was heavy, almost suffocating. Shadows twisted and writhed, bending and stretching in ways that made the walls seem alive. The path led them deeper into the heart of the curse, a place where time itself seemed uncertain, where every step felt like walking on the edge of a blade. Lucian and Alara moved cautiously, the crystal pulsing faintly between them. Its light cut through the darkness like a fragile thread, illuminating the danger that surrounded them. The warlock had not moved. He lingered at the edge of the mist, his cloak blending seamlessly with the shadows, his eyes fixed on them with cold calculation. "You have come far," he said, his voice smooth as silk yet carrying a weight that chilled the soul. "But the heart of the curse is not meant for the unworthy. Step closer and it will test you both." Lucian tightened his grip on the crystal. He had faced countless threats in his life, yet this was different. This was not a test of strength or cunning. It was a test of the heart, of trust, and of understanding. And he knew without doubt that he could not face it alone. Alara glanced at him, her eyes steady, her hands small but firm in his. "Remember," she whispered, "the threads can be seen but not controlled. We must choose together." Lucian nodded, drawing in a deep breath. "Then let us begin." They stepped forward and the shadows seemed to react, curling around them like a living sea. Shapes emerged from the mist, some humanoid, some strange and unrecognizable, their faces blurred. The warlock's laughter echoed around them, low and haunting, as if the very walls were mocking their courage. "This is the first trial," Alara said softly. "We must pass it or the curse will grow stronger, feeding on fear and hesitation." Lucian's eyes swept the room, taking in the shapes, the shadows, the shifting mist. The crystal pulsed, responding to the tension in his chest. He understood now that the threads of fate were not just distant possibilities. They were alive, flowing, and sensitive to emotion, to intention, to courage. Every hesitation, every doubt, every fear could twist them into danger. A shadow lunged at them, moving faster than the eye could follow. Lucian reacted instinctively, stepping forward and guiding it away with a gesture, not with force but with intention, as if commanding the thread of possibility itself. The shadow paused, shifted, and then dissolved into mist. Alara smiled faintly. "Good, you feel it. The threads respond to what is true in your heart." Lucian's mind raced. He had always relied on power and fear to control outcomes, but here, the law of the world was different. Patience, understanding, and clarity guided success, while arrogance and aggression fed failure. He began to see patterns in the shadows, movements in the mist, subtle signs that showed him the path forward. Step by step, they moved deeper into the heart of the curse. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the very atmosphere resisted their presence. The warlock's eyes followed them constantly, calculating, waiting for a misstep. But Lucian felt something growing inside him, an understanding of the city, the threads, and the delicate balance that must be preserved. Finally, they reached a chamber unlike anything they had seen. The walls were carved with symbols that shimmered with faint light, and at the center of the room floated a heart-shaped crystal, suspended above a pedestal of black stone. It pulsed like a living thing, radiating power, mystery, and a quiet warning. "This is it," Alara said, her voice almost a whisper. "The heart of the curse. Once we touch it, everything changes. Be careful." Lucian stepped forward, his hand reaching out slowly. The warlock moved as well, shadows swirling around him, attempting to block their path. "You cannot take it," the warlock said, his voice echoing with menace. "It belongs to the darkness. Step forward and you will fall." Lucian's gaze met Alara's. There was no fear in her eyes, only trust, only certainty. He understood that the choice was not simply to take the heart. It was to face their own fears, their own darkness, and act with clarity. Together, they reached for the crystal. The moment their hands touched it, a wave of energy pulsed through the room. Shadows screamed and twisted, the warlock recoiling as if burned. The threads of fate shimmered visibly in the air, twisting around them, testing them, probing their intentions. Lucian felt every mistake he had made, every choice he had forced through fear and power, every life he had controlled or harmed. The crystal showed him what could have been if he had acted differently: moments of mercy, moments of love, moments of understanding. Each thread offered a lesson, a glimpse of the man he could become. "Ilara," he whispered, "I see it now. This is not about defeating him. This is about understanding, about choosing the right path." She nodded. "Yes, that is the true power. The curse can be ended only by clarity, trust, and the courage to face yourself." The warlock screamed in fury, shadows lashing toward them like tendrils, but Lucian and Ilara remained focused. Together they projected their intention toward the heart, not with force, but with truth, with understanding, with trust. The crystal pulsed brighter, its light cutting through the darkness. The warlock tried to resist, calling on every shadow, every dark thought, but the threads of fate were stronger when guided by clarity and courage. Slowly, the darkness began to unravel, the mist dissipating, the shadows dissolving. The warlock's power waned as the heart responded to the purity of intention, not to fear. Finally, the chamber fell silent. The heart floated gently above the pedestal, glowing softly. The warlock, now stripped of the shadows that gave him strength, vanished into the mist, leaving only the echo of his presence behind. Lucian and Ilara stood together, breathing heavily, feeling the weight of the victory, but also the weight of what they had learned. "You did it," Ilara said softly. "We did it together." Lucian looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time without the weight of fear or power clouding his thoughts. She was small, yet stronger than any opponent he had faced. Wise beyond measure, courageous beyond belief. He felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something else, something quiet, deep, and tender. "You have taught me more than I ever imagined," he said. "Not about power, not about fear, but about what it means to lead with understanding." Ilara smiled faintly, a small, radiant light in the midst of shadows. "And you have taught me something too," she said. "That trust can be chosen, not forced. That even the smallest thread can guide the strongest heart." The heart of the curse pulsed gently, then slowly sank into the pedestal, its power dissipating into the air. The city itself seemed to exhale, the fog lifting slightly, the shadows retreating, leaving behind a quiet calm. Lucian realized that the balance had been restored, not by force but by choice, by courage, by understanding. They walked out of the chamber together, the crystal's light fading as they returned to the city streets. The fog had thinned, and the first light of dawn touched the rooftops. The city seemed different now, alive yet peaceful, as if it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Lucian turned to Ilara. "The curse is broken," he said softly, "and yet I feel that our journey is only beginning." Ilara nodded. "The threads are always moving. The choices we make shape the future, and there will always be shadows. But now we understand. Together we can face whatever comes." He smiled faintly, feeling a lightness he had never known. The weight of power, the burden of control, had been replaced by clarity, trust, and understanding. And by his side was the child who had whispered warnings, who had guided him through darkness, and who had shown him the true meaning of courage. "Together," he said, taking her hand gently. The city below them shimmered in the morning light. Birds began to sing, the streets came alive with movement, and for the first time in years Lucian felt hope, not fear. The threads of fate had been tested and proven, and he understood that true power was not in control, but in choice. As they walked back toward the manor, The crystal in his hand pulsed faintly one last time. A voice, soft and almost imperceptible, echoed in his mind. The future is never fixed, but some debts are eternal. Lucian glanced at Alara, and she smiled knowingly. They did not speak of what the debt meant. Some truths were felt rather than named. Instead, they walked together, ready to face a world shaped by shadows and light, bound by trust, courage, and a shared destiny. And somewhere in the distance, the city breathed, alive with possibility, waiting for the next choice, the next thread, the next whisper that would shape the future. The curse had ended. The warlock had vanished. The heart had been restored. But their story was only beginning.